Our project, oh, that was too close. Our project, Retro Net Zero, is all about supporting regulatory decisions with science. So we understand that regulation is incredibly important, but we know that the complex regulatory landscape in retrofit and the built environment can be a challenge for innovators to navigate. So what we're looking at is how policy and regulation can respond to the needs of the retrofit industry and regulation, and also how innovators can better navigate the policy and regulations that exist in the space. What we don't do is we don't lobby or campaign for reduced regulation. We understand that regulation is important. We're not a group that's all about cutting red tape, but we do want to make sure that regulation is being used in the best way possible to support the outcomes you want to see for retrofits. We don't propose new regulations. We don't provide tailored or individual support for innovators. And we don't test products ourselves, but we do look at who does have that capacity to test products. Our objective is really to enable the adoption of innovation which facilitates net zero domestic retrofit by using regulatory science. But you'll see that we've kind of branched out of that scope a little bit, because we've also looked at benefits beyond net zero and the need for innovation in commercial retrofit. So what's the problem? And what we're hearing from innovators is that the regulatory environment can be unclear and ambiguous. There's a lack of agreed definitions, pathways through regulation. Regulation doesn't cover all the innovations that are out there, especially if you're in a new product category. And we know that innovation by its nature happens quickly. Regulation can take longer to the hold. And those approvals can be laborious and costly, particularly when you're needing to test a product. And you might not even know what test houses are even available to you. Regulation is incredibly important. As I mentioned, it's really there to support consumers, make sure that their health and safety is protected, avoiding unintended consequences, which we all know is a massive issue if retrofit's done badly. Is there set minimum standards, but also it helps to change behaviours. Regulation's really there to drive action when the market wouldn't. It create that action itself and where that action is needed to create public benefit. So we're a network of networks. We're bringing together networks for the National Retrofit Festival, from the HEDIED, Planet Mark, and from VRE to try and sort of collectively understand what the industry needs, creating critical mass, consensus for change, and also to develop relationships between those that have issues and those who can help fix the issues. We've been talking to lots of different stakeholder groups, from manufacturers to local authorities to funders to consumers, and we're holding different groups on each of the different challenges that we all touch on. So now I'm going to hand over to Alison, and she's going to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we've already done today that you can already access right now. Spoke to you, Alison. Was she? Do we?
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Alison Pickle. I'm head of the Constructing Excellence at BRE. Constructing Excellence is a movement that aims to get the construction sector to come together right across the supply chain to look at how we address challenges. One of the biggest challenges the built environment faces is how we do retrofit in a way that adds value and is to provide safety, etc. So many challenges with this. So what have we been doing as a team? Well, we've been conducting challenge reviews for cycles. January to April, we've done cycle 1, where we looked at innovation adoption pathways. I'll talk a little bit more about those. And a regulatory science capability directory, I'll talk a little bit about that. Rachel's been looking at feasibility of better regulation. The common benefits of retrofit, that's something that's really close to my heart from a constructing excellence perspective. We've got value toolkit, which is all about how you can take a more holistic approach to cap all investments. Cycle 2, which we're just finishing off, they finished it late August, publishing some of the results. The pilots are online, should be online in the next day or so if they're not online yet. So we looked at you did some work on natural fiber insulation materials, a big hot topic area. Field trial dates, resent appendix Q, and then opportunities, which Rusi has been leading on opportunities can come to sizing project for free like compass for households. So again, that's one of those big challenge areas. coming off, working on its moment. He's supporting it and be this demonstrating yes. Iman said,
What's this gig bias?
oh, I'm quiet. Oh, there we go. Something. We're supporting innovators to demonstrate health outcomes of retrofit, clarify procurement, and exploring certification coverage, product systems are applied to retrofit. Again, think nifty challenges. If you want to find out more, go onto the website. All of the resources that we've produced today are on there. You'll see some of the research that's done on Challenge 3, the benefits of retrofit, the innovation pathways, the directory, etc. And some of these are living, breathing documents. So if we've missed something, we don't need to. We can't do everything. So let us know. There's contact details on it. Sorry, I can't get. Does he? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Right. Yeah, there's. I don't know why I can't get that where. Okay. So the innovation pathways are basically one of the first projects that you worked on. And this builds very strongly on the work that the energy systems capital is done around looking at stages that people have to go through to get their innovations implemented on retrofit gigs. We decided to look at this because we got a lot of feedback from innovators that they were struggling to get the products to market, and they were they were investing a lot of time and effort in pathways that didn't actually get them to where they needed to get to because they didn't know where to go for that information and advice. And so what we've done is we've created some guidance on how you can get that product as to market so that we could avoid the risk of people taking those road pathways again. As I said, that was developed in conjunction with it built in some of the work that the energy systems catapult have been working on. And then we've added to that with some of the other wider retrofit products and materials that are in play. And we have also developed this regulatory science finder directory. It took us quite a while to actually work out when we started the phase 1 of this project, what constitutes regulative science. I'm not sure everybody fully was aboard for that bit. So actually what we've done is we've pulled together a directory of people, of organizations that have the capability to support in this area. That could be through testing, they could do it through certification, etc. It's a it is complex area, but it's in place for a really good reason. But understanding that ecosystem and where to go is one of the things that we've done to try and make that or seamless for everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Christine from the National Energy Federation or Foundation of and she's going to talk us through the group what she's been doing.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay, so I work for National Energy Foundation. I'm a retrofit coordinator and I have a history in construction and also in energy and fuel poverty advice. Okay, so the challenge I'm looking at is the heat pump challenges that is heat pump installers experience. Of course, heat pumps are not a new technology. They've been around a very long time. In fact, heat pumps are older than gas boilers. However, their rollout in the UK is very new. So replacing a gas boiler with a heat pump typically reduces carbon emissions by about 80%. So the government really do need joined up policies if they're going to reach their target of achieving net zero. Okay, so from this graph, you can see what the challenge they're facing. Currently, there are 23 million homes with gas boilers in the UK, and there's an annual replacement of about 1.7 million. Current figures suggest that the heat pump installations for 2024 will be just under 100,000. So it's quite some challenge the government have to meet if they're going to achieve their target of installing 60,000 heat pumps by 2028. So hence it's really essential that we address as many regulatory challenges that heat pump installers are facing as possible. And there are quite a lot of them. Our research has primarily focused on two of them, but there are many. There's at least a dozen regulatory issues for heat pump installers. So the thing we decided to concentrate on was that we were well aware that there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that people installing a heat pump, if they got more than one heat loss survey, there might be a huge variation in that heat loss survey. This, of course, is very problematic. On the one hand, it really undermines confidence in the technology itself, and it also undermines confidence in the installer. And to explore this, we carried out desktop research and in-depth interviews with a variety of installers, from sole traders to some of the big installers in the marketplace. We also interviewed people working as sole trade as in the private sector, in eco schemes, and in social housing. We interviewed many stakeholders such as the Heat Pump Federation, and manufacturers, Carbon Trust, and many other organisations. I have to say, our research is not complete, and the focus has since widened, but these conversations are still ongoing. Our initial findings show that planning restrictions are still also one of the biggest uncertainties. In conservation areas, rules vary a lot between local authorities, which can cause much higher costs, and very often the consumer will give up. Even where development rights exist, unclear rules, and particularly issues around noise regulation, create a lot of uncertainty and confusion. So clear national guidance is needed, and more importantly than that, training for planning officers to help overcome this barrier. On heat loss surveys, consumers reported large variations in the heat loss survey results. As mentioned earlier, this really erodes confidence. Installers identified calculating ventilation losses and assumptions around hot water requirements as the most problematic element. Some felt that oversizing was baked into the methodology. While oversizing is much safer than undersizing, the lack of consistency undermines consumer confidence. Furthermore, a significantly oversized heat pump will cost an awful lot more to install. It will run less efficiently, and we really do need to use transparent, evidence-based assumptions for design and add on a safety factor rather than relying on oversizing being embedded into the assumptions. Undersizing is, of course, a much greater risk than oversizing, but we need to start with accuracy and then decide on what's an appropriate safety factor. We also identified many other barriers, so I'll just touch on a few of them. So MCS audits tend to focus on process paperwork rather than technical quality. Inspectors may lack the necessary expertise to carry out a technical audit. With different documentation for different technologies, installers face added complexity and cost. Of course, a balance is needed and not oversight to ensure quality, but enough flexibility to allow customer choice and also to allow installers to innovate. And also that it's not that the regulation is also cumbersome, that it's going to deter new entrants to the sector. In new builds, MCS accreditation is not required, and there is currently no building standard to work to. This lack of oversight means poor quality installations can slip through, such as undersizing heat pumps or systems still designed for high temperature and heating systems. For example, if they put in a combi boiler and they haven't allowed space for a cylinder in the future, then it'd be much more difficult to install a heat pump in the future. This is a real missed opportunity to decarbonise our new housing stock. And finally, the biggest barrier of all, which every installer and stakeholder mentioned, is the high electricity price relative to gas. Addressing this single most important policy change would really make a huge difference in increasing the heat pump uptake. Once we can say with confidence that installing a heat pump will be much cheaper than running a gas boiler, they will, that's the thing that will really drive demand for heat pump installations. Okay, thank you all for listening.
And now we're going to Papalai. I think that you're probably going to have lots of questions for Felix. This is definitely a very hot topic. So please do think of them. But first, we're going to hand over to Layla, who's going to talk a bit about commercial retrofit.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Dela Tassi and I am the Policy Executive at Planemark. Planemark do sustainability certifications for carbon emissions and to help businesses achieve net zero. And we've been part of the Retrofit group for 2 years now. We are looking at the commercial aspects of retrofitting and the cross learnings between domestic and commercial retrofitting. Okay, so we'll actually look at commercial retrofitting. Here are a bunch of stats from the UK GBC, so if you want some more, go to them. Around 80% of buildings that will exist in 2050 already exist now. So a lot of times when you're looking at carbon reductions, it's in new builds, but really there's such a big opportunity and market already present that we should tap into. Then a bunch of other stats, and 23% of the built environment's operational emissions come from commercial buildings. So again, there's something to look into. So again, Planemark, we do sustainability certifications. We don't do retrofitting projects, but a lot of our members do have a lot of retrofitting projects, and we help them along the way, finding partners to work with and calculate their emissions along the way as well. Here are some of the things that our members are doing. And we found that the approach that's helped members benefit the most from retrofitting is taking a holistic sort of portfolio-wide view on it and instead of working on one building at a time, working on all of them at the same time. One of the benefits is just economies of scale, and it lets businesses sequence different upgrades in smarter order. Some other more practical steps we've seen include replacing gas boilers with heat pumps, swapping out light systems, improving HVAC, and updating glazing. So they all sound like small measures when you look at them in isolation, but together they actually make quite a bit of emission cuts. And similar to domestic retrofit, it's not just about energy efficiency. Retrofitting and commercial aspects actually improve comfort, well-being, productivity. So even though people often frame or see retrofitting as a cost, we're trying to reframe that for businesses so that it seems like more of an investment, an asset value, and tenant satisfaction. It's just a rewording so it sounds better. So this is really important because many landlords and asset owners, that will be a reason why they would invest in it rather than looking at it from more of an environmental point of view, which you should look at it from both sides, but return on investment always helps. And so at Planemark, we have a UK net zero business census, and this year we asked about heat pumps, and we found that only 6% of businesses have installed heat pumps, and over half of them said that they can't install heat pumps. So part of the question is whether you've done it, whether you plan on doing it, and then whether you can do it but don't want to, and then whether you can't just in general. And so more than 50% say that they can't. And then a fifth of companies have installed on-site renewables. So that's still pretty low numbers. And so looking into why these figures are so low, we looked at some of the challenges online. I'm not going to read them all out for you. They're on there. But some of these challenges actually apply to any net zero project. So lack of awareness, skill shortages, and then something a bit more relevant to retrofitting would be big capex costs, disruption to tenants, especially with retrofitting HVAC and glazing. And then when we look at the market and risk factors, the returns of investment are uncertain, which we talked about before, and so landlords are reluctant to invest. And then we often talk about regulation as being a stick. So an example is the minimum energy efficiency standard and EPC thresholds. But these are powerful drivers because they create a standard asset risks for landlords that actually push them to take action. And one of the things that we want to look at is how to turn that stick into incentives so that those who aren't within those thresholds want to implement retrofit and want to do more energy efficient actions. We'll talk about that a bit more in a sec. And so, one thing that we think links quite closely with some of the other panelists, even though we do commercial retrofitting, is on that co-benefits piece, where we can be asking some of the same questions for commercial buildings, such as how do regulation and standards also incentivize things like indoor quality, resilience, and productivity. There's a strong case when you reframe retrofitting as an asset optimization, which I mentioned previously. So the trick is making sure that regulation and innovation keep up with each other so that businesses don't see retrofitting as a burden and more as a pathway to protect their assets and future-proof their businesses. And then finally, if you want to speak to proper professionals about commercial retrofitting and how you can do some cross-learning with more domestic retrofitting, we are doing a roundtable on the 25th of November to discuss challenges in commercial retrofitting. So if you're interested, come and talk to us afterwards and we'll sign you up.
Thank you so much, then. So before we go to some questions, I'm going to just talk a little bit about one of the challenges that we at the Hub have been leading on. So our hypothesis to start this challenge was that we think that probably regulation could do more to incentivize and enable retrofit innovations that deliver benefits beyond energy efficiency and net zero. So we started a bit of a path thinking, okay, yes, we know net zero is very important. It's the reason why the network was put together, but we know that the benefits of retrofit are much broader. So we did some co-benefits mapping. This was led by both our project and another project that my colleague Sarah was working on, where we tried to really quantify and map each of the different categories of retrofit benefits. We then took this to our working group 2 and started to think about, okay, if we're going to start looking at these from this project's perspective, how do we decide what's in scope? How do we decide what to prioritize? Did some scoping work. We did some surveys with our groups to figure out what people wanted to really focus on. And we came up with the conclusion, which is probably pretty obvious to everyone, that really people wanted us to think about risk of damp and mold, indoor air quality and thermal comfort. So we started looking at what are the regulations in the space that try to prioritize these improvements. We mapped what regulation existed, how the regulation defined the benefits and hazards, were the regulations outcomes based, what was the scope of the regulations, how they implied and enforced, how aware were people of the legislation and the regulations, and were there any gaps? We looked at things like the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, the Decent Home Standard, upcoming AWAB's law, and we also looked at the building regulations, Part F and Part O, and also how energy performance certificates and MEES might, in an adjacent way, kind of lead to some of these benefits. And we found that although there is quite a comprehensive regulatory landscape, there are massive gaps in terms of how well these regulations were understood and enforced, and also how innovators can actually demonstrate in their products and solutions help you deliver against these regulations. So we wanted to sort of understand, okay, what can we do as a project to support innovative products and solutions to be able to be used to solve some of the challenges to achieving these regulatory outcomes? And this is in the context of massive change in regulation. You've got AWAB's law coming in a month, updates to Decent Home Standards, minimum energy efficiency standards being updated and applied within the social rented sector, the Renters' Rights Bill. There's a massive push towards improving the health of our homes. And we also know that the Procurement Act has changed. So the Procurement Act has been updated to hopefully enable more SMEs and innovators to be specified on larger projects. And we know that there are probably a lot of products and solutions out there that can help create these changes. So I've listed a few examples on the right, but things like insulation that's more breathable, that has more capacity to regulate humidity, has a higher thermal mass, active systems that incorporate sensors to manage indoor air quality, the sensor technologies themselves so that you're planning and targeting the right works for a home, and potentially also finishes that are breathable and have positive indoor air quality benefits. There are a lot more, but I guess just to give you a bit of a flavour of what types of innovations are we talking about here. So we're now putting together a couple of stakeholder groups, one of local authorities and housing providers who have procurement teams who are looking at trying to solve both MEES upgrades and HHSRS, decent home standard upgrades at the same time. And we've got some scope in this project to provide resources that can really help them to engage with innovation, to deliver better outcomes. And we're going to be talking to them about what sorts of resources, guides, specification templates would be useful. But also we're going to be working with innovators to see how can they better demonstrate benefits to those types of procurement teams so that they can get their products into homes having the impacts that they need. So this is all live. If you consider yourself to be one of those different stakeholder groups, either a procurer or an innovator, do come and have a chat with us afterwards, because we'd love to talk to you about what your needs might be there. And now we're going to go to questions. I've got a few questions, but please do start putting up your hands if you have questions yourself. But first, Ali, I wanted to come to you. And I know you talked a bit about the innovation adoption pathways, but why do we need these pathways? Why is it so complicated to get innovation into the built environment and into the retrofit sector?
I think the built environment is quite a complicated sector. So my background is knowledge transfer, and I used to work with innovators, and I could never for a million years understand why perfectly logical technical solutions weren't making traction in the marketplace. It wasn't until I got involved with constructing excellence that I realized, oh, actually, the technical challenge is it's logical, it takes work, things don't. I think it's the technical challenges are more difficult in retrofit environments because there's so many different variables. But I think the biggest challenges are the cultural and commercial challenges of getting things through and convincing people that it's worth taking on board the risk, which is where regulation comes in. So regulation is there to help de-risk that decision making, because if you've got a certification, if you've got something that's saying that this will perform in a particular way in particular circumstances, that really helps organizations who, as we say, we're not talking about fast-moving consumer goods. What we're talking about is people's homes and buildings. It's a lot harder to put things right if we get it wrong. It's not like Apple could just go, oh, oops, we made a mistake. We've got, iOS 18 warning, whatever. We have to make sure, there's
no automatic bug fixes.
Exactly. Well, the bug fixes involve get back into people's homes, disturbing their lives. Maybe you might have put some nice cube wallpaper up and that might get wrecked in the process. These are big things that impact people's lives. So we do have to make sure that we get it right. I mean, the entire built environment does, but I think retrofit is one of those areas where people really do have, we've got to be really mindful. This is people's homes at the end of the day. And quite often they're still living in the, there is an impetus on us to get it right, but there's also an impetus on us to make those homes perform better. So it's quite challenging. And I think that's where regulation's really important.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted you to come to you next, Christine, and ask about, you talked a bit about oversizing and undersizing, and that gas boilers are often significantly oversized, and that sometimes isn't a major issue, but why is it so much more important to size a heat pump accurately? And, how does that work, and why is it so important that we get that bias?
Well, there are two reasons, really. I mean, there is a culture of oversizing, and I guess a lot of people who will be putting in heat pumps have come from the gas sector, and gas boilers are very forgiving. I mean, if the gas boiler is, twice the size it needs to be, it's going to operate just fine. There's two elements with the heat pump. Number one, if you oversize, it's going to cost you an awful lot more money. You're not just putting in a new heating device. You've also upgrading the system. So, if the assumption is the house needs far more heating, then you'll upgrade the radiators. You may increase some of the pipe work, and you'll also have a bigger heat pump. That's all extra cost. The other element is that heat pumps don't work they do work, but they won't work quite as efficiently if they are oversized. It is a technology that's advancing and innovating, and better and newer models will modulate down so they can cope with oversizing quite a bit more. And they had to be able to cope with upsizing. So when you think about it, during the winter, they might, when they're working at full capacity, but during the summer, the shoulder months, might only be working a quarter or a third of capacity. And modulating will take care of that so that the heat pump is sighting on and off too much and therefore running inefficiently. But a heat pump is quite limited in that. If it's very oversized, in addition to having to modulate that and cope with the shoulder months, it will start to cycle on and off, and then it will run quite inefficiently. So.
Thanks very much. And I guess before we come to the audience, I had a question for you, Layla, which was, you talked about commercial retrofit, and it's a space that I used to work in. And I wonder, where do you see the opportunities for innovation in commercial retrofit? Is it a potential opportunity to help innovators scale? And why is it important that we get innovation into that commercial sphere?
Well, I'm going to start with the last question. As we saw, the 80% of buildings are already here. So we need to start with that. And that's why we need to start getting innovation into there, because these buildings will age quickly. So getting sort of new tech and modernizing these buildings is super important. So getting innovation in retrofitting to have these buildings last as long as they plan on being is really important. And then that also with innovation comes reduction in costs, which we've been hearing is a major challenge all day. So more tech should be lower costs, more retrofitting, that cycle going through. And I think what we're seeing a lot more with new innovations is the use of AI and automated BMS, which is being super useful for energy efficiency and cost savings as well. So that's kind of the trajectory we've been seeing now with innovation in this space.
Yeah, and I guess the commercial sector is going to be very driven by, well, their funding. And so that might include net zero requirements, but also their bottom line. And where innovations can reduce costs, that's a really great opportunity for innovators to be able to scale up. I don't know if you want to give in too early.
Yeah, there's also a risk in that commercial space of stranded assets. We're seeing a lot of big real estate companies divesting from assets that they can to bring up to a particular standard. I think as ESG becomes much more embedded with the financial services environment, I think there's going to be a lot more of drive for that in the sector.
I think as well, it's an opportunity for the domestic space, because often there are bigger budgets to do things like proper building performance evaluation, proper monitoring, and proper commissioning in the commercial space. So trying to use some of those findings and data to understand how innovation might then be safely used in the domestic sector could be a big opportunity. Anyone in the audience with a question? I'm going to come first here.
I think this question with Ellie in particular probably. So I have a bit of a bugbear about U values for insulation and the way the building regs and the level of U values they use to specify kind of really incentivizes the use of materials that are bad for indoor air quality, it's bad in moisture management and all those other things. So just wondering if in the work you've been doing, are there any kind of alternative metrics that you think you might be better than U values?
I'm not the press to ask about that, but what I could do is actually go and ask some of our experts in our energy team who, work on that and work on all of those in our energy team and work on all of those things. But yeah, I think we need to, and I think it goes into the co-benefit space really strongly. We need to move away from a single, if we get fixated on one thing and ignore other things, like these microphones need to do, and we actually end up with these unintended consequences. I think it could really, and especially funding's linked to one metric, I think we can end up with lots of people do it for the right reason, but actually Koreans really don't. But it's a lot easier to have a single metric that everyone can understand. So lots of work to be done there.
I think that a lot of the evidence is out there about how some of these metrics do influence health, but they're not incentivized by regulation. So we're talking to Indie Nature, and they were saying, well, the way that our material stores heat isn't factored in the same way as it would be for a product that's doing it through a sort of thermal transmittance kind of solution. They obviously have a very good thermal transmittance as well, but they have additional benefits of being able to modulate heat. But there was some research that Desnes put out that talked as well about the the impacts on indoor air quality from changes like switching to a electric boiler from a gas boiler. So I think that there's a lot of evidence out there, but it's not being well integrated in regulation at the moment in order to lead to the right outcome. So I guess that's what we're going to hopefully focus on next. And it'd be great if you wanted to come along to one of our workshops. Matt.
Hi, Matt Molloy, editor, Refurb and Retrofit magazine. It's a question for Ali. Hi, Ali. Me again. So we interviewed Professor Richard Fitton earlier this week, who's just been introducing the BSI standards for retrofit. So the standards are there, regulations there, but the bottleneck is in innovation at the moment. How do you think about the calls to increase the capacity of organisations like yours so that we can accelerate the approval and testing so many of the new innovative products? Because we've got products over a waste innovation network across the centre here, and one of them particularly has still not been approved, but it's going to be going into big infrastructure and buildings. So what about increasing your capacity? How do you feel about that?
I'm the wrong person to ask about that. And I think that's something that we can take offline, because I think there is, obviously increasing capacity requires investment, and that investment's got to come from somewhere. So yeah, I think we should take that one offline.
A good place to look would be, though, our directory of those bodies that have got the regulatory capacity to do the testing and to do the certification. Because I think what we found was that a lot of innovators just didn't know where to go. And a lot of those places do have massive backlogs, is what we understand. So I think it could be positive.
Yeah, I think it is really positive. Then we all get this upsurge of demand. But it's like anything else. If you haven't had demand for a long time, the supply doesn't exist to the same extent. So it's get that balance right, as it's actually a good challenge for us to have, is where demand outstrips supply from a market perspective means that we do need to invest and get the right people with the right skills and my right methodologists. The last thing you want to do is cut corners in this stuff, because that's going to ruin the market in the long term.
Any of that goes tonics.
Is this word in Retrofit? I'm an architect or a client architect working for a social housing provider, and that we're sort of involved in more on new development, but interested really in how that's really refurbished, retrofitted in our future. This one's really, I think, for Christine. We've done some really sort of highly insulated type houses where there's a very low heat load. There's always been concerned that heat stored up there as well, the balance sort of lower heat load. So we've induced an air source primed hot water so then induce it. So panel heat is for by the emergency if it gets cooler. Do you see, as there's this sort of convergence with house standards, the insulation standards get higher and higher, that maybe there's a different technology rather than sort of heat, but I totally get you're not going to be able to get there with retrofit. Or where do you see it for, and maybe longer term? Or if you were advising me, what would be the best thing to be putting in so that technology hits it right?
Okay, that's quite a difficult one for me to ask, because my focus has been heat pumps, but I guess there's other options like battery storage or heat storage. There are options, I think, that will become mainstream. Yeah.
It's a challenge, isn't it? That sort of, when we're getting to like passive house levels of performance, then the solutions do start to potentially change, because your energy heat demand is so much lower. But I guess we're seeing you're focusing on the sort of maybe the vast majority of homes who are just nowhere near that thermal performance.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and as you say, like the big demand will be for hot water, not for heat, and so that is going to have to be addressed.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, I have a final one, I guess, for all of you.
I think we have 5 minutes, yes. Amazing. So I just wanted if each of you could reflect on what some of the key barriers that we've heard from innovators on trying to get their products to market are. What are there any that rang a particular bell with you? just I suppose one barrier each to innovators getting their products into the retrofit market. I don't know. You want to go first?
Well, I mean, there were lots of barriers for heat pump installers. The industry is very young, so I mean, one of them would have been training. A lot of funding has gone into training. A lot of gas engineers are transitioning over, but that really doesn't give them the experience they need to be able to install a well-designed heat pump system. And the technology, there's a lot of crossover. The technology is, similar in places, but designing a heat pump system is very different to designing a gas boiler system. And in a sense, that is an area where installers identify they have a real difficulty finding, well-trained fitters or installers that can follow their design and install a heat pump to a really high standard.
I think that skills issue is massive. And actually, apart from bottlenecks, the testing and certification process, I think one of the big things that is a big challenge for innovators is actually really understanding the context in which the product's going to be put into. And I think things have moved on since I last really worked in earnest with innovators, but I think sometimes they see a simple solution and don't see the context around which that's operated within. So, example, the procurement challenges, how that might actually, understand where they sit within the value chain as well, who they need to collaborate with, how they can actually improve with the implements, and what could say, is the supply chain there? Are there skilled people there to install it? Is the warranties there? Are the people there to maintain what are the maintenance cycles? I think quite often you get these fantastic ideas that don't have really 100% looked at it from a client perspective. And I think actually one of the things we probably need to do is get a bit more of that articulated from a sort of not just a user perspective, but to go through making the decisions about whether or not it gets put it to the buildings in the first place.
So I think from a commercial perspective, it is that piece of lack of awareness or investors not wanting to, put in money without that certainty of return on investment. So I think just increasing awareness, trying to talk to them, like you said, looking at it from a client perspective, how you could get them on board to implement these challenges, because the research is there, the work is there, it's just getting them to actually put these to work.
Thank you very much. Please say a massive thank you to our panel. And if you have other questions or you want to get involved, do come and chat to us after.